say thank you for sharing your story here with us. I'm really excited to dive into it. Little did I know when we first got in contact that you have so much to your story.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to hear almost like two different stories, because I think it's really going to be able to resonate and reach with a lot of women.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get started. Tell me, think back.
Yeah.
When did it first just start for you? If you can, kind of, it's hard. I know for me, when you go through so much of life, sometimes it's hard to kind of go back to that place.
Right.
But if you can just take us back to the very, very beginning when it all
Sure.
started for you.
Sure. Well, I have like no family history of infertility. It was not something we were expecting. And we got married. I was 29. We got married. We were married for a year. And I was on the pill for that year. And I came off of it unexpectedly because like a month before we were 1 year married, I lost my father very suddenly.
Mm.
And so I just, in the craziness of that, I just, forgot to take the pill, and I like for a period of time. And then once we got through my dad's funeral and all of that, my husband and I talked, and he said, you know what, let's just stop this, and let's get ready to start a family. And that was that. It wasn't like, it was just like, well, we're just going to stop. It wasn't like we're actively going to start trying now. And within 2 months I was pregnant. But unfortunately, and we weren't, like I said, officially trying or anything, but it unfortunately was an ectopic pregnancy. And so obviously we lost the baby, and it was one of those situations where I didn't know I was pregnant until there was something very wrong. And so it was like an emergency surgery because the tube had burst, and it was scary. And that was the start of our fertility journey, because in the aftermath of that experience and healing from that, we decided, okay, when you have an ectopic pregnancy, you have to wait 3 months to try again. So we waited the 3 months. That was in September of 2012. So 3 months after that, we decided to start trying. And so I was down one fallopian tube, and but I very naively thought we'd get pregnant again in 6 months or so, because when I met with my OBGYN to ask those questions, he was like, it could take a little bit longer because you only have the one tube now, but you're young. I was 30 at the time, and like I said, no family history or anything. So we really thought 3 to 6 months we'd be pregnant again. And so it wasn't happening. And I just started to feel like in my gut something wasn't right. And I think when you decide that you're ready to start your family and it's not happening, every month is way too long. When you're ready to be pregnant, you want to be pregnant then, and so, yeah. So the months were just going by and going by. And I kept going back to my OBGYN saying, look, I really just feel in my gut something's wrong. I have this weird spotting going on. My cycles were really short, and all of that. And he really was like, look, you're 30, you need to give it a year. He's like, we could run some blood work, type of thing, but you just need to give it time. Because I had the ectopic pregnancy and I knew I only had the one tube, and I didn't know if the other tube was blocked or anything like that. So he wrote me a script to see a reproductive endocrinologist, and we saw an RE. And at that point, my only reason for even seeing the RE was just so that I could have the HSG procedure done. Procedure came back that my tube was clear. But then they had like a meeting with us, like an intro to fertility treatment type of meeting. And the clinic that we went to was like one of the really big clinics across the country. And I don't know if it was the doctor that we saw or whatever, but we just really didn't like the experience. It felt like kind of they took the human element out of it. And it was just like, this is what you can do, A, B, C, D, D, we'll have financial people call you tomorrow. And I was just like, at that point, we were still so new into the journey that I was just like, I'm young. Like I said, I've never known anyone in my family to have problems getting pregnant. I couldn't accept that this was going to be our story and that I needed to do some big, medical treatment in order to have a baby. So then we went down the road of doing everything natural, right? In a Google search of like natural alternatives to IVF, I found something called NAPRO technology. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before. No. NAPRO stands for Natural Procreative Technology. And basically, like, it's just an alternative to doing some sort of assisted reproductive technology. So basically, it was developed by a group of Catholic physicians because I guess if you're really Catholic, the Catholic Church, I think as a whole, doesn't condone any sort of IUI or IVF. And so they developed another way to treat infertility. And it's largely based on like, you chart your cycle for 3 months using this specific method. And they look at all the data that you have and are able to tell, like through your natural biomarkers, okay, like if you have this many days of spotting in the beginning of your period before your full on period or at the tail end or in the middle somewhere, you track, like you're discharged and all of that. And they use that information to say, okay, well, we're going to run this test, and this test. And we're going to find out why you're not getting pregnant, basically. A lot like doing, going to a reproductive endocrinologist. It's just that you don't do IUI or IVF, but a lot of the same medications, and you'll have like a lot of appointments because they'll be following you to see how your follicles are growing and all of that. They want to see how you ovulate. So it's still a lot of appointments. So we went down that road. Both my husband and myself really, really, really liked the doctor that we were seeing. I felt that he was like the first doctor that really listened to me. And I felt that, like he took what I said seriously and allowed me to be, a person on the team, sort of, instead of just, like, I'm the doctor, you're the patient. I'm going to tell you what we all need to do. We really like the dynamic with him. I was having a cycle every month, and it wasn't like, it was normal 28 days. But when I was ovulating, in the middle of the cycle, the follicles were still so immature that there was like no way I could get pregnant because they weren't healthy. So basically they would grow like halfway and then they would release, like, ovulate. And so they started me on like Letrozole. So I took that for a while, varying doses, and it never really helped. I was going in, one day for a sonogram to see, we were trying to gauge if I was going to ovulate and all of that. And he thought he saw polyps on the scan. And so he said, I can't really tell just on this 2D image, but if there are polyps, then we would need to remove them because it would, if you were to get pregnant, you could miscarry and all of that. And he was like, and since we don't have any other answers right now, maybe we should just go in. And he suggested doing a hysteroscopy. And he said, and when we do that, he said, I'll be able to go through your tube with like a tubal canalization. So it's different than like an HSG where they just put the dye in and wait for it to come out the other end. Like this is an actual like scope. And so so we scheduled that procedure. And I want to say like maybe 2 months before, I had come off all the medication, like the Letrozole, and I can't remember, to be honest with you, if I was on anything else. But came off the medication, waiting to have this procedure done. And then the plan was to start something more aggressive, probably like an injectable medication. So we had this procedure done, and he went through my tube with the scope, and he was like, there was, some debris in there. He said it could have potentially blocked something. He said it wasn't completely blocked, it moved through easily, but like now it's super clear. And and there was no polyps. And so the hysteroscopy just looks on the inside, they're not looking out on the outside of the uterus. And then, like I said, I was off medication, and I want to say the next month I became pregnant naturally.
Wow.
Yeah. And the really cool thing about that, and so that was about like, we were seeing that doctor for a year before I got pregnant. And the really cool thing about that, and again, like, there's an element that it's just God, when it comes to babies and life. So, yeah, because we were trying so hard to get pregnant, and, I was being monitored so closely and how I ovulate and all of this, we knew every month from like which side because I still had both ovaries. I just didn't only have the one tube. And so we were able to know like which side I was ovulating from every month. And so the month that I got pregnant, I was ovulating from my left side, which is the side that doesn't have any tube.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and I didn't even know that could happen. And he was just like, and it was a year that I really did not ovulate normally, like at all, even on medication. And it was like, I had some symptom. I never got a real diagnosis of this is what it is. It was, there was some like closeness of it to PCOS, but I never had enough of the markers for an official diagnosis. And like I said, even though I wasn't ovulating healthily, I was still getting a cycle every month. And so anyways, yeah, so I became pregnant from the side that has no tube, and the doctor just explained it like, well, somewhere your hormones finally balanced out, because I was off the medication too.
Wow.
And, he said under the right conditions, if the hormones are right, like the tube from your right side could just reach over and, grab the egg from the other side. I mean,
that's so cool.
Yeah. And I'm just like, well, that's why God gave us two then, like I still to this day, I'm like, I don't know. It's
right.
Fast forward now, everything that's happened since that time, and then we had a whole nother journey of infertility before our next baby. I'm just like, well, at some point it was just the Lord,
Yeah. When you can't explain it, there's just no logic to it, Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
So, your firstborn is 6 years old now?
Yeah, he turned 6 last month. Yeah.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah. So then how long did you try again after your first one? How long did you decide to do IVF? Or, you tried naturally and then pursued IVF?
So when our son was 18 months old, we decided we were going to start trying again. And because of what we had experienced with the whole NAPRO technology, and we thought like, oh, well, we found out what was wrong, like it's not going to be this long, The next time I very much believed that we were not going to have this big long road again to have another baby. And it was like, in hindsight, I don't know if it was I was trying to protect myself from like experiencing infertility again and all the pain that goes with that, or it was just naivety, whatever it was, but I was like so convinced it wasn't going to take that long for the second one. Because one thing that I've learned, and is that when you experience, so like the whole thing from when we had our ectopic until we were pregnant again was about like just about 2 years.
Okay.
And I think one thing I've learned is after you have experienced infertility, even when you overcome infertility and you have a baby, all of that stuff that you went through, it stays with you. I think when I became a mom for the first time, when I finally had my baby in my arms, I sort of put infertility as far back in my mind as I possibly could. Because it's just, and it's really painful. And who wants to live in that pain, So we started trying again when my son was 18 months, thinking it was just going to happen. We did all the same stuff that we did the first time around. And I even looked like I was in better shape to become pregnant because I now was ovulating beautifully on my own and everything was healthy. And things looked like they were on the up and up. But then it just wasn't happening. So I started on some more stim medication. He was like, even though you're ovulating, maybe this medication will just help. Let's try this out for a few months. So I was on Clomid that time. We scheduled like another HSG to see if the tube is blocked. I lost count how many HSGs I've had at this point.
Me too.
Sometimes it was clear. I think one of the times it was blocked. Yeah, one of the times it was blocked. We did another hysteroscopy, the whole tubal canalization thing. Nothing happened. Like it didn't work again to get pregnant the same way. And I think we did that like twice within 6 months of each other, like the same thing. And I was doing a Clomid, and nothing was working. And about like the 2-year mark, where we've been trying for about 2 years, I said, what about doing an exploratory laparoscopy? Because what if I have like endometriosis and I just don't know it? Since the time that I first started cycling as a young girl, I always had really painful cycles. But the reason we had never really done this surgery before was because when I had my ectopic pregnancy and I had that emergency surgery to remove it, the OBGYN that I was seeing at the time specifically like wrote in his surgical notes that he did not see any endometriosis present. I'm not convinced that I don't have endometriosis, just based on like the pain that I had historically always had. I always had really heavy cycles. After I had my son, I was breastfeeding, so I didn't start cycling again for quite a while. But once I started getting into it, my cycles would get, like heavy, painful, but it was always better. Like after you have a baby, I think it just gets better. If you've had painful cycles, they're not, in the first couple of years, I think after you have a baby, especially if you're breastfeeding, you just don't have as many cramps, or at least that was my experience.
Yeah, that's been my experience so far.
I felt like this was like the last stone unturned kind of thing, and figuring out why we weren't getting pregnant a second time. And my surgeon was up for it. And he was like, let's do it, because he had no answers either. And I get that that's a step I don't think a lot of people would just jump into, because it's a major surgery and all of that. Who wants that? But I've always been like, I just need answers here. So we did that, and I had endometriosis. Wow. And yeah. And so I'm like, my whole pregnancy, like with my son and everything, again, totally the Lord, the whole thing, because I became pregnant naturally and carried the baby to term. And I had some pretty significant I had like stage 3 endometriosis. Wow. It was on the outside of my uterus, all around the tubes. It was like tethering, like the tube wasn't like free flowing, the one that I had left, because there was all this, adhesions there. And so then that gave us answers as to why most likely we had the ectopic all those years before, because we never really had an answer for that. And so he cleared everything out. And this particular surgeon, like, he's a really good endometriosis, like, guy. He uses an excision method, and, you know, people would fly in from other states to have surgery with him. So, like, I mean, like, I knew I was getting good care. And so then we're like, I mean, it was like a punch in the gut, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, we got our answer. Now maybe we'll be able to get pregnant. And still nothing. And the months would go on and nothing. And we kind of got to the point with him where, you know, we had done everything we could, and there wasn't anything else that he could really offer us. At this point in the game, I was really, it was just hard, that going through infertility, well, secondary infertility, while having a toddler, you know, and needing to be strong because you have a baby that you're, you know, a child that you're raising. And it was really hard for me. And eventually I started going to some counseling, and my husband would come with me sometimes because it was just really, really painful. And it was different because I was already a mom. And when I was going through primary infertility, you know, I didn't have any, and I wasn't raising any children. So, you know, I could cry whenever I needed to, or whatever, I could let that out, but I couldn't this time around. So, and I think when it finally, you know, going through that, and when it dawns on you that this is not going to be an easy road again, and who knows when it's going to end, if it ends, if there's a baby on the other side of it, like all of those things that you question. Yeah, it was just such a punch in the gut and so discouraging. And my little son, who started asking for a sibling since when he turned 2 years old. I remember, like, food shopping and being in Costco and having him with me, and, you know, passing a family that had a bunch of, you know, siblings, and my 3-year-old crying. Like, he started crying in the Costco, looking at this other family, saying, well, where's my sister? Where's my sister? Where's my brother? And it was just like, it was heart-wrenching. It was so heart-wrenching. And there was so much guilt that I had of, like, not being able to give, you know, my child a sibling. And it's just different. I think when you go through primary infertility and secondary infertility, they're two totally different experiences, but, you know, pain is pain.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so I started getting counseling, and this is when I really started like looking for some support. And so I started getting counseling. I started, you know, seeking out infertility support groups on Facebook. I really didn't know at the time many people that were experiencing, and all my friends are like super fertile, have, you know, a bunch of kids. So, like, it was just, I mean, I'm sure you can relate. It was, for me, and I think for most women who go through it, it's just a very lonely, isolating thing to go through.
It is.
And yeah, so that was, when my son was 3, and we've been trying for like 2 years. That's sort of like when I hit my low with it. And I was so done with, like, taking any kind of medications and having all these appointments and surgery and all this stuff. I was like, at that point, I was ready to be done with it. I wasn't ready to close the door on growing our family, but I went to my husband at that time, and I was like, listen, I don't want to do any more treatment. And I don't think our family is complete yet. But I don't want to do any more treatment. This is just too hard on me. And I have to I have to stay strong. I can't fall apart here. Like we're raising a baby, you know, our baby. And I was open to just completely stopping trying to get pregnant at that point and pursuing adoption. But my husband wasn't on the same page. Pursuing adoption and trying to get pregnant are two totally different things. And I couldn't fault him for not being like, okay, yeah, let's do this. You know, there's a lot that you have to process, I think, to actively say, okay, we're going to stop and now we're going to move in this direction. He was like, well, what about trying like something like IUI? And at the time, our insurance policy changed and we had insurance coverage for it. And even though I really didn't want to do any more treatment, my husband, you know, suggested we try this, and he wasn't in the place where he was ready to move towards adoption. And so I kind of like was just like, well, okay, I'll try this one more thing. IVF was always like the line we wouldn't cross. Like we would do everything up until this point, because there's a lot to wrap your mind around.
And it's very expensive.
And that too. And just the whole thing, soup to nuts. It's hard. And so we were going to try IUI, and we had the coverage for it. So this was January of 2019. We did our first IUI, and we went with a practice that somebody had read. They have a podcast, and someone had recommended their podcast to me. And so the name of the practice is, I live in New Jersey, so it's the Reproductive Science Center of New Jersey. And they're a smaller practice. Like I think most people, like RMA is really big in New Jersey. The Reproductive Medicine Associates, they're big, I think, all over the world, but they're really big here. Like I said, we didn't have a great experience there. So we went with this sort of smaller practice. I really liked their podcast. It was very informative. And so we chose to go with them. And we had met with the other one, RMA, at this point too. And they weren't like, didn't want us even to like try IUI. And they were basically like, it's just IVF type of thing. Like looking at our history, like they were advising against IUI. And at that point, we still we didn't even think we would be doing IVF at all. So we went with this other practice, and they were open to us trying the IUI. This is January 2019. And we did IUI with injectable medications, and I became pregnant from the first IUI, and then unfortunately lost the baby soon thereafter.
How old were you at that time when you started the IUIs?
36. So I became pregnant, had a chemical pregnancy, and that was just like a different low in the process, because, you know, now we've been trying for 2.5 years, and up until this point, I know my husband is so against us doing IVF, and I didn't even know that I was okay with it. That it really just felt like, okay, the buck is going to stop here, like the road stops here. But we had, like I said, this insurance coverage, and the RE that we were seeing was just like, well, you know, unfortunately it didn't work out this time, but we know that you responded well to the medications, you know, we can try again. And maybe get a different result, you know, with and he explained with IUI, you know, the more times you do it, the higher like percentage that you'll get, you know, you'll become pregnant. We waited for my beta levels to fall enough to try IUI again. Tried it for the second time and failed. We did it a third time and failed again. As far as my husband's like numbers were concerned, like they kept getting better, because we had like totally, you know, like we were doing Whole30, had cleaned up our, you know, we were doing all the things, you know, that you do really desperate. Coming from a place of not wanting to do any more treatment and then doing the more treatment and it working on the first time, but the pregnancy didn't progress. That gave me like the ache to want to have my own baby again, experiencing the loss. Going through those next 2 IUI cycles, in hindsight, I don't think I would do more than 2. Because by the end of the 3rd one, you're just so like, it was hard. You're just so like broken, and you just feel numb and empty. I was being monitored pretty closely because I was doing it with injectable medications, and my clinic was like 45 minutes south of where we live. And so I was having to get up to go really early in the morning. My son was with me for most of the appointments. So I'm like, dragging him out of bed. He's in his pajamas, eating breakfast in the car. And yeah, and it just felt like, okay, the road ends here. Or at least sort of that's what my husband was feeling at the time. And I was so devastated. And because we had experienced this other loss, I'm like, well, in my head, I'm like, now I know that I can get pregnant again. Because I'm, going into it, you don't even know if it's going to happen again. And right. I had, before we started the IUIs, I had got to that place where like, okay, it's just not going to happen again this way. And we can grow our family another way. Thank God we got to have one baby. I think the 2 of us were just numb and grieving. And, we grieve in 2 different people, different personalities, we grieve in different ways. I was starting to want to look into IVF further because, again, I'm thinking, well, I know that I can get pregnant still. And because we had experienced the loss, I think when you experience a pregnancy loss, or I'm sure it's the same with a failed IVF transfer, which I consider the same thing. You just have that ache so much more because it's like you were close, and so that's where I was, and I was willing now to look into IVF further because I was really hurting, and I still am like, we go through all this thing, and I'm like, in my heart, I really just feel like I can't give up. Felt like our family was not complete yet. And I couldn't let that feeling go. And I felt like I wasn't supposed to let it go. Because my husband just, like, he wasn't open to IVF at the point. So we take like a break. And I was fine with the break because I was just emotionally not in a great place. And we needed, sometimes you just need to take breaks in the process. Yep. Months go on, we're on this break, and my husband starts to have a change of heart where the conversation is now like open. All right, mate, let's just go sit down with someone and we'll talk about it. Don't know if we'll do it. Let's just go see what the options are. Because for him and for me too, the biggest thing about IVF that scared him going through the process and then having like a really large number of embryos that would be too many for us to use. We're past 35 now. We already have one child. If there's a lot of embryos, what are we going to be like 50 and still getting pregnant? This is why I'm saying no to this, because I don't want to be in this position of having too many. And like the only options that you have in that scenario are to donate, your embryos that you don't use, or don't donate them to science, donate them to another couple. None of those scenarios were something that he could be okay with.
That's understandable. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. That's something that we've had to talk about. And that's the hard part that a lot of people don't talk about, especially for those of us who are doing IVF after 35. It's a reality that we have to face.
At that point, I was, like I said, I was so desperate to have another baby. And I was like, well, we could have, maybe we could have enough control over the cycle that we won't get that far. Or like if they take so many eggs, we say, oh, we're only going to attempt to fertilize this many. Like we could put procedures in place to try and prevent that from happening potentially. So that was the biggest hesitation of IVF. So we go and we meet with the RE, And we were like, listen, this is our number one fear of doing the whole thing is this. And they were like, well, we could do, what is it called? Mini IVF. But then considering my age, what was suggested was that we do a full stem cycle and we get whatever eggs that we can get because of my age. And then if it's a larger, more than what we're comfortable attempting to fertilize, then we'll just, we'll freeze some eggs and use some in the actual IVF cycle. And so then we were okay with that. We go through the stem cycle. I was very scared though of going on birth control prior to starting stems, because I knew the experience that I had prior when we were trying to get pregnant with our son. So some people, birth control affects them, kind of like coming off birth control. They have like a pseudo PCOS, like it's not real PCOS, but it affects them for a long extended period of time. And we think that's what happened with me the first time around. We think that's why I wasn't ovulating like healthily, because I was like, my body is just very sensitive to birth control and it gets like over suppressed. So I was scared of that happening. But they assured me, it's just a couple of weeks and then, we'll start the stim meds. If you're on it for that little bit of a time, it really shouldn't have that effect on you. And we already know that you respond well to the stim medications because of what, I always responded well when we were doing the IUI cycles. And so I trusted them. So I ended up going on birth control. I was on it for like a whole month, like 30 days. And then we start stimming for IVF. And I'm not responding. Now, after responding really well, when we were doing the IUIs, they started me like, I guess on a mid dose somewhere of, I was on Gonal-F. And I'm not responding that great. So we had to like bump up the medications to like the highest dose for my follicles to start growing. And so so I'm on like the stims for like the max amount of time that you can be, and I'm on like the highest dose. And then in my head, I'm thinking like, maybe if I wasn't on birth control before this, or maybe if I was on it for 2 weeks and on a full month, I wouldn't be in this position, because I was basically what I feared was going to happen was happening. We get to the whole thing. So finally, we're ready to, do the trigger shot and all of that. And based on my labs and all the scans that I was having, we're expecting to get like between like 10, 11 to like 14 eggs. And which was an okay number for us. And like the way, the drop off happens with IVF, we're like, we were okay with using all of those eggs. We go in the day of the retrieval and they only get 5. And out of the 5, only 4 were mature. And none of us, including the doctor, we weren't expecting that. What happened is they went in and like the rest of all those follicles that looks like they would have like good sized eggs in them were just empty. And it probably all happened because of, just how I was managed from the beginning with the birth control and the stims, and it just didn't seem like the standard like cycle was the right one for me. And so there's now 4 eggs, and we did use ICSI because because we were very blessed to have it be covered by insurance. And that part was covered too. So they were like, if it's covered by insurance, let's just do it. And so we did that, and all 4 of them fertilized. But then by day 5, there was just 1. And so 1 was frozen. And we had started off the process thinking that we were going to PGS test because of my age and because I was so scared of going through the whole thing, and it's so emotional, and the drugs and all the stuff. I was really scared of going through the whole thing, and that if we didn't PGS test because of my age, like if we had another miscarriage, I'm like, I'm just not going to be able to handle it. Like, well, you can only handle so much,
Yeah.
emotionally. And so we had planned on doing the PGS testing, but then because of the way the cycle turned out and there was only one embryo, we pulled out of PGS because we're thinking, well, now there's a really big chance that we're going to have to do the entire thing over again from the beginning. And that's honestly, we were kind of expecting that. And so we took like a month off to just like decompress from all of that, like give my body a chance to recover from being stemmed, and just like weigh out our options if we're going to move forward with a transfer or if we're going to try and do another stem cycle. And it was around the holidays because our retrieval was like right around Thanksgiving, and I'm like, I don't like, let's just go through Christmas. And we decided that instead of transferring, we'll just do another stem cycle. So that's what we were going to do. Then we find out the insurance won't cover another cycle unless we use the one embryo that we have because we didn't PGS test. So because it was unknown if it was genetically normal or not, they just assume that it is, and so they won't cover another cycle unless they knew that it was genetically abnormal.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so we're like, well, then the decision's been made for us, So then here we are. And the whole thing, it just felt like such a crapshoot. Because I'm like, I was so scared of it not working or us miscarrying, and just being at square one again. And I didn't know how much more I had in me, like how much more we can keep dragging out this process. I really like had to spend a lot of time, like both of us, just getting in the right like headspace to go into a transfer now. And having to go on the birth control again, like you have to go on it again before the transfer and all that. I didn't know how, if that would affect things negatively in my case. But at the end of the day, we just were like, listen, we just came to a place where like, we have to just let it go and trust that God is in this process with us. And he's, going to see us through. And we felt so strongly like our family wasn't complete yet. And that we weren't supposed to give it up and all of that. Finally, when we got to the transfer day, like, I had peace about it because we kind of had we let it go. If it was going to happen, it's going to happen. If it's not, we would reassess and figure out what we were going to do moving forward. And because it was scary because I was 37 at the time of the retrieval. And we didn't know if it was genetically normal or not. Oh, and it was poorly graded. So on top of that, it was graded a 5CB. And and so it wasn't a good grade, and which even that, I hate the grading of the embryos because it's a beauty contest, like at the end of the day. And you're in such a vulnerable place just going through IVF period, to then hear that your embryos like look crappy. By the way, they look crappy because that's basically what it is. So we really didn't know. We were just like, all right, God, like if this is going to be if you say yes, we know that a yes from you is we're going to have another baby. And if it doesn't work out, then, we'll figure out what else we're going to do. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So, we just, at the end of the day, we had a lot of peace. And I think for my husband, it was reassuring to him that we were not like, for him, even though it was really scary, he was so thankful that we were not in the position of that we had too many. And he took that as like, you know, God has seen, like, heard my prayers, seen my fears, like, because we, at the, you know, like for him, it was such a journey of trust for both of us, but especially for him, it was such a journey of trust. Like, we just have to trust God. You're sovereign, like, you're sovereign over this whole thing. And you're here in the present and you're there in the future, and you got it covered. And so we went through the transfer, and it worked. You know, it worked. This 5 cb embryo that we knew nothing about, that, you know, should have been tested. We pulled out of the testing, whatever. It stuck.
Wow.
Yeah. And the crazy part about it was that all of that happened. We had the retrieval in November of 2019, but we didn't transfer until March 4th of 2020. And we had the beta test March, I think 13th it was, and found out that we were pregnant. And literally a couple of days later, like, the world shut down because of the coronavirus. So if it had been like a week after, we probably wouldn't have been able to, you know, do it. It was just everything, the timing of it all. Yeah, God was in it. So.
Wow. Gosh, that's incredible. I've talked to somebody else who she had told me that her embryo was graded the same. It was like CB.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it was a viable pregnancy. And it's like, you know, it's true. We get so hooked up on these grades, and sometimes they matter, but sometimes they don't, you know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's still good to hope in it no matter what.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Science only goes so far, right?
Exactly. So when did you deliver your baby?
She was born November 16th of 2020. Yeah. So she
Congratulations.
just turned, thank you. She just turned 4 months this week. So.
Wow. And what's her name?
Her name is Kaya Grace.
Aww,
Yeah.
that's sweet.
Yeah. And our son is Shiloh.
That's adorable. Yeah. Yay.
Yeah.
So now, do you feel like your family's complete?
You know, we probably won't pursue any other fertility treatment, just because it took us 8 years to have our 2 kids, and it's just a lot. Like, there was a lot that we didn't do because, like, fertility treatment just made things really intense. So we're not, like, closing the door on more children. We just probably won't do fertility treatment. So, like, if we were to get pregnant naturally again, you know, I'm not going to say it can't happen. We've talked a little bit more about possibly adopting in the future. Like, that's not totally off the table. So I don't know. Right now, the baby's still so young, so we're just going to enjoy her. And but I don't think we're ready to say we're done yet. We could be done. You know, we're definitely super thankful for the family that we do have. And it feels good right now. Yeah, it's just, it's too, and, like, you know, like, I'm sure you can relate. Getting to the point where you're ready to close the door after after you've been through years of this, like, it's like a theme of your life. Like, it's a major thing that takes, you know, a lot to be like, okay, we're done now. So
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when Valentina was 4 months old, I was nowhere even, like, I couldn't even answer that. I mean, you know, just even thinking about when pursuing a transfer again, or, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, no, there's too much. I need to focus on what's going on right now. So I totally get it. Completely.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, beautiful. I mean, it was a long journey, but my gosh, you know, you guys fought through it, and you had so many obstacles, but you got through it, and you have your boy and your girl, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. And one of the questions that you put on there is, what would you tell your younger self, or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
I think that I think I would tell myself to get help sooner, to reach out, find your community, get support, because it is so lonely and isolating. And it's one thing to share what you're going through with someone else, but you need to like assure that it's a safe place for you to share such a personal thing, because I definitely, like, when we were trying to get pregnant the first time around, and you know, we're just like desperate to have a baby and heartbroken and all this stuff, like, we shared like within our church community that we were struggling, and at the time, and nobody says anything out of malice or anything like that, but you might be able to relate to this, I'm not sure. When you put something that personal out there, what we experienced was that it sort of just opened us up to receiving a lot of questions about it when we were not anticipating it or prepared for it or wanting to answer any of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so that brought a whole different level of like pain and to the experience, because we got asked things that were just intrusive and not appropriate, and so that that made me like really close up. So then when we were experiencing it the second time around, we kept it to ourselves, like for those like first 2 years, and that wasn't the right thing either. because that just, then I was we were totally alone, you know, and it's so emotional, that nobody going through it should ever go through it alone. And the reality is that we're not alone, right? Like, it's 1 in 8, you know? And so it was, you know, when I was searching out other women, couples that had experienced, you know, were going through it, it was really, really helpful to find you on YouTube and some other people that were, you know, I followed. It mattered a lot. And I know that, you know, whatever you experience in fertility, and even when you do become a new mom, that's a whole different experience. Support, like finding your community, like, it is crucial.
I really appreciate you for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.